For my Into the Wild project, I decided that I'd like to combine not only the book we read, Into the Wild, but also my conservatory and what we do in there. And as many people assume, which is not very true, P&D, the conservatory I am in, all we do is build tables and chairs. Well, I thought it'd be pretty funny to like fall into this stereotype, and I decided to build a chair. Now, the way I related to this to the Into the Wild was I plan on building the entire chair out of all green woods, which basically means that I'm finding them in nature and sanding them down and getting them to basically get what we consider hardwoods or anything that is usually made for like cabinets and regular chairs and all that jazz. Um, well, of course, the first problem or the first thing I had to solve was to find the materials. And a couple of months ago, I actually went on a fun hike out in Laguna, and I just remember the scenery and nature was so beautiful there. So I went out there again, and I went on the path, and I was just looking for a lot of just dead piece of wood off to the side, try to find very similar types of wood just for some continuity throughout the chair, um, along with just dryness, just to make sure it's not like soggy and breaking apart. I look for like the thickness of the wood, just because we're trying to support a human being. We don't want any like scrawny little branches, so I try to find not obviously not trunks, but again just like the bigger branches that are usually lower to the trees. Um, I was fairly successful in getting a lot of the wood. I didn't need to go out a second time, so that's always good. And the reason, along with not being in P&D, I wanted to be a chair, make a chair, was for some weird reason, whenever um, I would almost doze off in class, I would always find myself staring at the green chair in the front of the room. Now, I would never doze off, because that would be inappropriate of me. Uh, but yes, I don't know, just it's so memorable. Definitely this year is just that green chair that is always there, and I feel like we never really use it sometimes, but it's always in the same spot. The first part of basically if we're ever using greenwood is kind of getting rid of these knots. The knots are just they're cool and showy, like if like oh natural wood. However, they're really bad, especially if you're trying to like sand it down and just get kind of a finer piece of wood and just working with it. It just they get on the way a lot, and it's really hard to like screw things in or drill in them, which we'd be doing later on. And then so after I got rid of all the knots on the different branches, or the big knots at least, I took for the smaller, the thinner branches, I took my electric sander belt and I sand them all down, just getting rid of that outer layer with the bark. I try to get almost all of it to like this nice whiteness, yellow type of pigmentation, and that's kind of what it stayed like after the fact. We want to kind of get rid of that gray bark and have just a little bit of brown just to bring some like pop and lightness. And while I did the sanding for my uh, my thinner pieces, my thicker pieces were much harder to get rid of the bark. It might have been the type of wood or just something weird with my sanding belt. So what I actually had to use was a um, basically a hand planer. And how this kind of works is it's basically like shredding cheese. With all the wood I collected, I also had to find a way on how to get the seat. And what I did is I actually a tree near my house either like a month ago actually got cut down. So we used part of the stump to actually make this the seat of the like where you'd be sitting.
Three days later.
So after done sawing the trunks in half, I had to basically sand them down, make sure they're flat and level, and make sure they're the exact same uh, thickness, so they basically line up and make a very comfortable seat. So again, I took my sanding belt just because it was going to be quicker. Now I have all my pieces, they're all sanded and they're ready basically to be cut. And this is like kind of our second or our third stage before assembly. So for those thicker pieces, those are going to be my legs, obviously. So I had to measure out and make sure all of them were equal size or generally equal. Now the only thing hard with working with natural wood versus kind of the harder woods or what you're most used to is there's a lot of waviness in the wood and the lumber. It just makes it harder, especially for like craftsmen and cabinet makers. Just putting them into a furniture is just like it because it's not only does it kind of look weird, it just functionally will not work sometimes. So this was basically me making the kind of container I was using to make the seat and get the resin in it, just so it binded together the two different pieces and made that again that river type of thing. So what I had to do was basically get black piece of paper. I traced out the entire trunk and get the general shape, and then I got another black piece of paper, cut that into three different strips, and then glued it around the outline. And what that hopefully was going to do was create this like kind of seal around that would not leak and make sure it kind of fits the exact same shape as the two trunks together. And then resin or epoxy as it's sometimes known. How this works is basically there's two different solutions. There's a hardener and then the resin itself. So what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to measure out equal amounts and then pour them into each other and then mix it around. I chose the blue again, going for that more natural and that river type of look. And then it was time to basically pour it into the crevice right there. And after 2 days of waiting, we then took off the binding, and it was still a little sticky. I think I didn't use enough hardener, so that's why it didn't really fully dry. And then again, with that, I put all the sawdust and the wood chips that I gained from the second process, and I just filled the gap with all the excess. Okay, and now um, I went to Home Depot and I got a metal bar. This was just basically for support of the seat, because again, there are two different pieces. That resin isn't, again, because I didn't use enough hardener, it wasn't the best thing structurally. It again was holding it together with the glue and the wood chipping. However, I just felt like it would be needing more structure if you're like supporting 110 to like 200 pounds of like a person. So what I did is I measured out like the general distance that I need to support um, the that little gap. And again, I would do it perpendicularly, not parallel, because that wouldn't make any sense. And I marked those both off, and then I went to the angle grinder, and it's gonna be a lot of sparks, kind of fun. And what the angle grinder is basically just a super fast moving disc. It's used mostly for metal. You can use it for wood, I guess. It's gonna burn it though, but mostly for metal. And I just went all around turning it, um, making sure we're just getting nice even lines. Um, and then I just use the saw. You have to use it a little bit in the beginning just to basically make a notch, and then keep that straight line. So there's the first one done, throw on the ground. And then, as you might see, I had a little towel there, or whatever you want to call it. And I actually had to have that there because what happens is it gets so hot from burning or turning so fast that it will send like heat to the entire, basically, the entire metal, all the metal. And then I took the angle grinder and grinded off the edges just because usually after cutting metal it's very sharp and we didn't want, like, people cut themselves. Okay, and that was really done with all the cutting pieces, and that was kind of the assembly part and getting everything made. So the first thing I worked on was, again, that seat, just because it's like, again, a chair. That's the biggest thing you're going to see, nicest thing, and they're going to support the most structure and function. So what I decided doing, of how getting the legs in, was basically putting um, 4 screws upside down, and then 4 screws actually into the wooden seat itself. Now what this did is it basically allowed me to screw in those 4 screws to the wood and keep the metal in support, obviously what I want to do. But it also allowed me to basically get the legs on much easier rather than having to either staple it, nail it, or screw it through the top of the seat and leave like a bunch of marks. Like another reason, for the third reason why I feel like I needed to build a chair and how I felt like it connected into the wild is because Chris McCandless, in my opinion, wasn't really running from society or wasn't really going directly into nature. I felt like it was a combination of both. Um, and a large part of what he talked about and what he did was basically going away from that reliance on that society and inventing new things and basically industrialization and more going back to the natural side. And I felt like this is what the project really resembled in my eyes. And I felt like the chair was a great resemblance of this because again, a chair, like, you don't really think about it being that like amazing and like how what people have to do to go like to make this in the industries and the factories to make these are kind of, it's just like a simple commodity. And I felt like because of that it's like forgotten as like kind of this like leisure type of things, um, in that like in nature there's not just like a bunch of chairs all around. So basically, if you're a Christian mechanics and you're like, I want to make a house or something, this is how you make it. And basically, looking at those like simple leisureties that we are thought in day to day life and like, or kind of thought of as the background and not very important, and how basically how much effort and how much is needed to basically make these things, and how kind of amazing these um, manufactured goods can be made from the nature, and how the nature is actually supporting of all of the life, even though it's thought as kind of this like um, uncivilized place with like animals and all this stuff. So right now, what I had to do was basically take off all of the paper, the black paper that was still stuck to the resin. This was just to basically expose resin and get it not only easier to dry, but just get that better look and that more of that, again, that natural river and that like kind of deep blue that we were looking for when we first did the resin. And this is also just to check whether we got through basically the entire gap, or whether we need to do another layer. The last part of the build was doing the back of the chair. So I got a bunch of different pieces, cut them all the correct lengths, and I glued them together, as well as basically getting some rope and gluing that for just extra structure. Now, how I actually made it connect to the seat was I had the screws that were from the bottom, like from basically the legs that were going from the legs up, and they actually fit perfectly with like the width of like a normal chair, and I screwed those in, and then again glued the different back pieces until it was just what I wanted it to be. And there it is.